Police investigations can be pretty tricky, but few are as complex as the one we're about to share with you. 7 Action News investigator Bill Proctor has the incredible story of how a police raid in Redford has triggered a slew of allegations, investigations, and frustration.
It all went down about a year ago at Best Way Auto Sales on Livernois in Detroit. The business owner, James Scott, says it was the day his life was turned upside down.
That particular day, all hell broke loose. Everything I worked for was stripped from me.
James Scott doesn't mince words when he talks about the February 2nd, 2012 raid at his auto sales and scrap metal business. His anger is pointed at the Western Wayne Auto Theft Task Force, which is run by the Michigan State Police.
They waited till we left to invade our house, invade our home, tear down the door, and just tore the house apart.
Scott says the task force was searching for stolen cars that had been towed to his business to be crushed and sold as scrap. Scott sells used cars and recycles others for scrap metal. He uses independent tow truck drivers to find the junk cars. After taking them to the crusher, the scrap steel company pays Scott for the value of the metal.
I was number one in this town, in the scrapping business, but I did it honest.
But he says his business is all but ruined now. He says the task force trashed his home, hauled away his property, and he claims they took $180,000 in cash from his safe.
This is one of the most egregious actions I have ever seen.
Scott and his attorney showed us these bank receipts that indicate he had withdrawn the cash he claims the task force took from his home. They also gave us these photos showing how the place was trashed during the raid. We've also obtained this search warrant that the raid team used to seize the property from Scott's business and his home. Some of the items have been returned, but there has been no mention of the money. And there are still 19 vehicles, including trucks needed for his business, that are locked away in storage. So we went to get some answers. This is 2nd District headquarters for the Michigan State Police, also the headquarters for the Western Wayne Auto Theft Task Force. But no one's talking here, not Lieutenant Ray Collins, who heads up the task force, and not this man, Detective Sergeant Kevin Rafe of the Redford Police Department, who was in charge of the case. We were able to get a response from the Michigan State Police headquarters in Lansing. They gave us a written statement that says, in part, it confirms an internal investigation was initiated in April 25th of 2012 following a report that money was stolen during the execution of a search warrant at the residence of Mr. James Scott. This investigation is ongoing, unquote. Beyond that, what we do know is that since the raid 12 months ago, not a single tow truck driver has been charged, despite evidence that 60 stolen vehicles had been scrapped by Scott's company over a 10-month period. That is out of 5,000 vehicles scrapped. These forms obtained by Action News show both the State Attorney General and the Wayne County Prosecutor refused to charge Scott because, quote, since Best Way does not process the vehicle's original title, and the vehicle is destroyed at strong steel, there is no way for the suspect, Mr. Scott, to know if the vehicles it sells are stolen, unquote. Meanwhile, the cost of this raid continues to climb for Mr. Scott. He recently went to Gene's Towing, where the seized trucks have been stored since the raid, only to be told that he must pay more than $30,000 to get them back.
Obviously, he didn't get his money back. He didn't get his vehicles back. And he's being told he's got to pay for the storage fees.
Scott is now suing to get his property, his business, and his reputation back.
My business had reached a peak in Detroit. I took nothing and raised it to the top. My life is destroyed.
Scott went to court to get his property back, but the judge decided to reject his claims. So he's now appealing that court ruling, something that could take more than a year. For now, his only hope is that the Internal Affairs investigation will agree with his claims that what happened to him was an injustice and that someone should pay for what he continues to suffer. Bill Proctor, 7 Action News.
Today, the Insider Exclusive goes behind the headlines in Justice in America, the James Scott and Milton DaSilva stories, updating this ongoing investigation and lawsuits filed by Matt and Matthew Brown, partners at Brown & Brown, against Lieutenant Ray Collins of the Michigan State Police for violation of their client's constitutional rights and violation of the RICO Act. In this insider exclusive investigative national TV special, we will meet with James Scott and Milton DaSilva and get their first-hand personal accounts of what really happened with Lieutenant Collins, why their personal property was confiscated, and why the prosecutors and the Michigan State Police aren't doing more in the search for the truth. We'll also meet with their attorneys, Matt and Matthew Brown, to get to the bottom of these very serious charges. Matt and Matthew will explain their legal strategies and specific challenges in their pursuit of justice in these cases. Police abuse and corruption remains one of the most serious and divisive human rights violations in the United States today, because overwhelming barriers to accountability make it possible for officers who commit human rights violations to escape due punishment and often to repeat their offenses. Police or public officials greet each new report of abuse and brutality with denials or explain that the act was just an aberration, while the administrative and criminal systems that should deter these abuses by holding officers accountable instead virtually guarantee them impunity. This special insider exclusive investigation discovered that police abuse and brutality is persistent and rampant across America, and that systems to deal with abuse have failed. An examination of any local newspaper during any given week will most likely have an article about a police officer that got caught committing some kind of corrupt act. Police misconduct statistics gathered by the Cato Institute's National Police Misconduct Reporting Project confirmed that around 1% of all police officers commit police misconduct in any given year, and the consequences of such misconduct are grim. We discovered that the barriers to accountability are remarkably similar from city to city. Shortcomings in recruitment, training, and management are common to all. So is the fact that officers who repeatedly commit human rights violations tend to be a small minority who taint entire police departments but are protected routinely by the silence of their fellow officers and by flawed systems of reporting, oversight, and accountability. Fortunately, cell phone cameras have allowed citizens to record and report police misconduct. And although in the past most police misconduct stories were assumed to be false, a quick search on YouTube's police brutality search results in hundreds of videos exposing incidents of police misconduct. One example of a compilation of news and amateur video about the problems inherent in this system is the website policeabuse.com. Matt and Matthew Brown have often stated that the problem of police corruption and brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness. In this great and strong nation, we have all become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of the conflict. Matt and Matthew have earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as some of the best trial lawyers in Detroit, in Michigan, and in the nation. They have seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police abuse and brutality. They understand that police abuse and brutality are some of the most serious, enduring, and divisive human rights violations in the United States. The problem is not just in Detroit, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, they are driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. They learned a long time ago that if a man hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live. Their goal is not only to get justice for their clients, but to make sure all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agendas. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Detroit, Michigan. It is my great privilege to introduce Matt and Matthew Brown to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Well, thank you.
Tell our audience a little bit about your law firm. What kind of practice do you have here?
Well, we basically do everything general civil to probate, police misconduct, personal injury, employment law. We're heavily focused on sticking up for the little guy and fighting for their rights.
Okay, and you've been doing this for how many years?
It's 26 years as of May
26
of this year.
Wow.
Yes.
Today we are here on Sticking Up on the Little Guy, a case that involves two individuals, right? James Scott and Milton DaSilva. Tell our audience a little bit about these two clients.
Well, first we'll start with James Scott. James has a very unique business down in the city of Detroit, which consists of basically when someone gets a scrap car, they bring it to his facility. He removes the catalytic converter for the precious metals that are contained within it. And then a lot of times the aluminum wheels can take it off. And then the remainder of the vehicle goes over to a steel company, then they melt it down and they give him money. But the way it works is that there are independent tow truck drivers that he has independent agreements with. They go out and they find people who have junk cars and they offer them, say, $50 generally for the car. It's their job, the tow truck driver's job, to get good title to the vehicle. That title ultimately is brought to the steel company, not to my client.
Right.
But my client worked up a very lucrative business of bringing these vehicles, stripping them down, getting anything that's valuable off the car, melting it down, and then getting the money. And this went on for a while. Then there came a time that a police task force that was headed up by this Lieutenant Ray Collins determined that there must be something illegal going on here. They obtained a search, and they literally came and raided my client's home and then raided his business.
Right.
When they went to his home, they ransacked the entire home. They found a safe, and as my client indicated, and he says he's got bank records to prove it, and I've seen these records, that he had $180,000 in cash in that safe. And that money was removed during this raid. My client was not there. He wasn't home at the time.
Who was it removed by?
It was removed by the police and Lieutenant Ray Collins and some other members of this multi-jurisdictional task force. So it wasn't just the state police, but they were working in concert with other law enforcement agencies, apparently. So they seized records and they seized money from his house. They then went to his scrap business and they seized what I believe was 23 vehicles, some of which were large trucks used for transporting vehicles, and there was approximately 19 vintage motor vehicles. Because part of what my client does too is that he takes older cars, fixes them up, and sells them. So the police came in there wholesale, took all these vehicles, seized all the records out of that facility.
Now, under what basis is he taking the vehicles? Claiming that they were what, stolen?
Claiming that they were stolen and this was a chop shop.
Yeah.
And to that end, they prepared an affidavit, the police did, that they presented to a magistrate, indicating that this was a chop shop operation and there were stolen vehicles on premises. So therefore the warrant was issued, the vehicles and equipment and documents were seized. Then the police took this information to the prosecutor's office, first to the state prosecutor, which is the Attorney General's office. Right. They declined to prosecute. In a written letter said, look, there's no crime that we can find here, because it turned out nothing was stolen. Nothing that they took was stolen merchandise. So then they took it to the Wayne County prosecutor's office and looked at the same documents, same evidence, and they too said, we can't see any crime that was committed here, and they declined to prosecute my client. So should be case over at that point. Right. However, as we found out, the vehicles remained in storage at this tow yard. Meanwhile, they came back, and I was personally privy to this phone call. We called and said, you know, can my client come get his vehicles? Well, he's got to pay the towing fees, which have now $80,000. And my client's business basically got shut down as a result of this raid. Right. A couple of things happened. One is all of his operating capital was taken. The vehicles that he needed that were essential to run that business were taken. Mm-hmm. So he couldn't operate. He had no money, he had no vehicles, he had nothing left. He hired attorneys, they went to court on what we call a writ of mandamus, saying, you know, officials, there's no crime here, give him his stuff back. The judge, in a surprise decision, really said, well, they said that they are releasing the stuff to you and you've just got to pay these towing, so I'm going to dismiss the case.
Yeah.
It was at that point that our firm got involved. We went back to the court on a motion and said, Judge, you need to reopen this case and you need to let us file all these various claims involving his civil rights and his constitutional rights. Yes. The judge said, no, I'm not going to do that. So once he decided he wasn't going to reopen a case, and coincidentally that judge retired shortly after this decision, in any event, we then are at the Court of Appeals level. In the Court of Appeals in Michigan, it's taking somewhere around 18 months. Mm-hmm. And we're well into that process now. We're maybe a year into that process, and we're still waiting.
We're here talking about two cases because we have the same Michigan State Police Lieutenant Ray Collins involved in both cases, correct?
Yes.
And you are representing, both of you are representing, but you know more about your other client. A little fact summary of what's going on with his case, what happened to him.
Sure. Milton DaSilva operates pawn shops, mm-hmm. and one day a police officer came into his shop in unmarked clothes, mm-hmm. and demanded he state any reason or present a search warrant. Mr. DaSilva indicated to him that he was the legal title owner of that vehicle, yeah. And despite that, Lieutenant Collins became very irate and demanded that he turn over the keys or that he was going to shut down the business.
Did he show him any proof that this vehicle wasn't his?
Well, Lieutenant Collins admitted during his preliminary exam testimony, yeah. that he had ran a check in the Secretary of State and it came up as the owner as Milton DaSilva. Mr. DaSilva indicated to Lieutenant Collins, I am no the keys, and I'm going to shut the business down.
Yeah. Now he confiscated that vehicle, right? And another vehicle, correct?
Ultimately, he did confiscate an H2 Hummer, yeah. from my client, and then an Escalade that was traded for the Hummer, right. involved in the original pawn.
Now, I understand also that when Lieutenant Ray Collins came into Milton DaSilva's business premises, some money was missing also. Is that correct? Is that what you're alleging?
Yes. Prior to Lieutenant Collins coming in there, Milton DaSilva employees, his yeah. manager, was counting the cash for the change for the day in his office.
Right.
And then upon him leaving, the cash was gone.
Okay.
And there were witnesses that saw him grab something off the desk.
Today we have with us both James Scott and Milton DaSilva, and we're going to bring on James Scott first. So let's do that. It is my great pleasure to introduce James Scott to the show. Welcome to the show, James.
Thank you, sir.
How long were you in business prior to this event happening?
I've been in business since 2000.
Right. So for 13 years.
13 years.
All of a sudden, out of the blue, the police show up. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And why do you think?
I look at this as just a flat-out takedown, a robbery.
Robbery by whom?
The Michigan State Police Department.
And anybody in particular?
Lieutenant Ray Collins and a detective from Redford, Michigan.
Whose name is?
Kevin Rafe.
Okay. And why are they doing this?
Honest, law-abiding citizen who's worked hard all his life. And I think that they're doing it for their own gain and greed.
Now, you had, what, 30 cars confiscated? 20, 30?
It's roughly around about 19 to 20 cars that was confiscated.
Currently in storage someplace, correct?
Yes, at the tow yard.
And they are demanding how much? $80,000 storage fees?
Well, they started out at 80,000.
Yeah.
And they come back and tell me they're gonna give me a break. You can get the cars for $30,000.
Right. Now, you are alleging that the police came into your home. There's no question about that. And you are now missing $180,000.
$180,000.
Okay. When you present this evidence of what James has said, things are missing out of his house, the fact that his business has been destroyed, judges are not paying attention to this?
You know, at the hearing, you know, the Attorney General got up and said, well, no, look, you know, we're giving them all their stuff back.
Yeah.
And then Mr. Scott's attorney that was representing him at the hearing said, well, wait a minute, Judge, is the $180,000, and they're saying, we never saw any of that money, and of course there's all these denials, and they're saying, basically, we gave him his paperwork back and everything else, but obviously they took that money. And it doesn't account for the fact, like Mr. Scott said, the way he was completely violated, the way that their house was just ransacked and left in that condition.
Now, the case is on appeal right now.
It is.
Okay, so you're going to bring us up to date at a later date, correct? Pretend that Lieutenant Ray Collins is here right now, James. What would you say to him on national TV?
Quit. Get off the force.
I want to thank you very much for being on this show. It is my great pleasure to introduce Milton DaSilva. Welcome to the show, Milton.
Thank you.
Matthew, you are primarily handling the case with Milton, correct?
Yes.
Why do you think the police are targeting you with these false allegations, confiscating your property, and taking money out of your business, correct?
Yes.
Why do you think that's happening?
I think he's just been targeting any kind of businesses that have cash.
You're talking about who?
My business, Mr. Scott's business.
No, what I'm talking about is who
Pawn
is targeting.
shops. Mr. Collins.
And that's Lieutenant Ray Collins of the
Lieutenant Ray
Michigan
Collins.
State Police.
Yes.
Now, when they confiscated your Hummer, correct? They also confiscated another vehicle, an Escalade, is that right?
They took from me that day from my shop, my Hummer, some cash, and a gun hanging on my wall.
And the cash, when you say there was cash on your desk,
Yes.
you were counting the cash?
Yes.
Approximately how much?
They took approximately $4,000 to $6,000.
Okay, and you no longer can find that, and it's after they left, it was gone.
Correct.
Okay, now regarding the Hummer, it was legally registered to you.
In my name, I asked him if he had a search warrant. I asked him if he had
Yeah,
any kind of paperwork to authorize him to take it.
yeah.
There was none.
Now, when you file your lawsuit on behalf of your client's losing things, missing things that have been confiscated by the police, which you're saying they shouldn't, what's their response? Denial?
They've been in denial on this. They've used the term. They said that he made an administrative. He transferred the title administratively, which obviously you cannot do.
What's that mean? What's that mean?
Well, he basically informed the Secretary of State to transfer the title because he believed that there was fraud involved. He filed some documentation with the Secretary of State. The only way that they should have been transferring titles through the court order or through the consent of obviously the owner, Milton DaSilva. And what's unique about this situation too is that they took the Hummer down to the tow yard. The Hummer was released the next day to a third party, despite the fact that my client has valid legal title to the Hummer.
Yeah.
And the vehicle's now gone, and there's a criminal case pending right now, and the evidence of this crime is gone. The evidence of the alleged crime is now missing.
Yeah, I understand that there was no criminal charges pending against you while you kept your mouth shut. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, but the minute that you filed a lawsuit, is that correct?
Yeah, the minute that we demanded back the Hummer because they weren't pursuing criminal charges, they wouldn't give the Hummer back because it was missing, obviously. So we filed a lawsuit, and then 4 days later they brought criminal charges in an attempt that we believe to cover this up.
We also have with us one of your employees who actually witnessed, or is a witness to the missing money. Is that correct?
Correct.
And her name is Kara
Rowell.
Rowell, and we'll bring her on right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Kara Rowell to the show. Welcome to the show, Kara.
Hi. How are you?
You're one of the managers at Milton's shop, right?
Yes, I am.
And on the day that the police came in, what did you see?
I had sent them to the office. They followed me back. They walked in, shut the door, following the two police officers behind, but it took them a minute to come out. I had seen one officer reach over on the wall and pull out off a gun off the wall, and then
Your gun?
Yeah, I have collectible guns that hang on my wall.
Okay. You saw him take a gun?
Yes, and then I had seen the other police officer. He had a binder in his hand, and he had reached over on our desk where we kept all the money, and he had grabbed the money, and I seen him put it in his binder.
Which officer did you see do this?
I seen, what was it, Collins? Collins grabbed
The lieutenant?
Yes.
You saw him take the money?
Yes, I did.
Well, we certainly hope this gets resolved in your favor, and I want to thank you very much. Courageous of you to come forward and, you know, speak on his behalf.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and thank you both. Is this a systemic problem with the Michigan State Police that they are not prosecuting somebody that's other people have made allegations of their wrongdoing?
Well, my response would be that I consider this to possibly be the tip of the iceberg in this situation. This gentleman has been, Lieutenant Ray Collins has been on the police force a long time. He's been working in this task force for a while, so it's hard for me to believe that these are the only two incidents. I suspect there's more. We've heard that there is more. We don't have any more information on that, but we're expecting during the course of discovery that we're going to learn more and more about his activities.
Right. Have other people come forward besides your two clients in reference to Lieutenant Ray Collins?
Yeah, there is another individual right now that is looking at pursuing a claim against Lieutenant Ray Collins, but he has not filed suit yet.
Okay. Well, please keep us up to date. We want to know more because this is an
absolutely.
ongoing investigation. I want to thank you very much for being on this show.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.